Every morning the market watched her give away what she barely had. While others guarded their food like treasure, she broke her bread in half and placed it into the empty bowl of a blind beggar everyone despised. They mocked her for it. They called her foolish, cursed her poverty, and whispered that kindness would bury her alive. At home, her mother lay dying medicine, unfinished hope thinning with every shallow breath. As if that pain were not enough, the woman meant to protect her began to sharpen a different knife, selling her future to an old wealthy man in exchange for survival. Then on the day she thought her dignity would finally be buried, the beggar vanished. And at the village festival, a powerful stranger appeared, walking straight toward her. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this remind us why kindness still matters. In a quiet corner of a dusty West African town where the sun ruled without mercy and hope often felt heavier than hunger, lived a young woman named Amara. Her life followed a rhythm shaped by survival. At dawn, before the market awoke, she would rise from the thin mat beside her mother's bed, wash her face with cold water, and whisper a prayer she was no longer sure anyone heard. By the time the first traders arrived, Amara was already arranging vegetables on a wooden stall. Tomatoes bruised, but edible onions, small and uneven peppers that burned the fingers and the eyes alike. Her clothes were faded, stitched and restitched so many times they barely held their original shape. Yet they were always clean. Amara believed that poverty did not excuse carelessness. Her hands told the real story. Rough palms, cracked skin nails permanently stained from soil and produce. These hands worked not for dreams, but for one fragile purpose, keeping her mother alive. Inside their small, poorly ventilated room, her mother, Mama Zola, lay curled on a thin mattress. Illness had drained her strength slowly, cruelly, like water leaking from a cracked pot. Some days she could sit up and speak. Other days, even breathing seemed like labor. Medicine was expensive. Every coin Amara earned disappeared into pills, syrups, and clinic fees that never seemed enough. Still, Amara did not complain. She had learned early that complaint did not feed the hungry or heal the sick. Her father had died years ago, leaving behind debts and silence. Her mother's sister, Auntie Safia, had taken them in not out of love but obligation. And obligation, Amara learned, could be colder than hatred. Safia owned the house, controlled the money when there was any, and never missed a chance to remind Amara that she was a burden. At the market, Amara kept her head down. She spoke only when spoken to, smiled only when necessary. Yet there was something about her that people noticed even if they could not name it. A steadiness. A quiet refusal to let bitterness settle into her bones. While others cursed customers for bargaining too hard, Amara listened patiently. While others hid spoiled produce beneath the good, she separated what was still edible and sold it cheaper. Hunger, she believed, should never be punished. By midday, the heat pressed down like a hand on her back. Sweat soaked her wrapper. Her legs ached. Sometimes her stomach growled so loudly she feared customers could hear it. But when she counted her earnings, she always did so with one thought in mind. Is it enough for today's medicine? Often it wasn't. On those days she would return home with her head heavy, calculating impossible numbers. If she skipped her own meals, perhaps she could buy half a dose. If she sold one more basket tomorrow, maybe she could cover the rest. Life became a series of sacrifices so small they were invisible to everyone else, yet enormous to her. In the evening, she sat beside her mother, feeding her spoonfuls of thin porridge, wiping sweat from her brow, listening to her labored breathing. Mama Zola never complained either. Instead, she watched her daughter with eyes filled not with fear but pride. "You are stronger than you know," her mother whispered, once voice trembling. "Promise me one thing, Amara." "What is it, Mama?" Amara asked, tightening her grip on her hand. No matter how hard this world becomes, Mama Zola said, do not let it steal your heart. Amara nodded, though she did not fully understand how a heart could survive in a world that demanded so much and gave so little. Still, she promised. It was the only gift she could offer. Outside their room, Auntie Sophia often listened with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. To her, compassion was a luxury for those who could afford it. She saw Amara's gentleness not as strength but foolishness. More than once she reminded her niece that kindness had never paid rent or bought medicine. You think people will save you because you are good, Sophia scoffed one night. The world eats girls like you. Amara said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than argument. But inside her chest, something stubborn refused to die. Each morning as she walked to the market, Amara passed the same gate at the edge of town. That gate marked the boundary between those who mattered and those who did not. Farmers passed through it with produce. Traders guarded it like territory. And beside it, always in the same place, sat a figure most people pretended not to see. She noticed him the first week she began selling at the market. A blind beggar, dark glasses hiding his eyes, a wooden stick resting across his knees. His clothes were layered with dust, his sandals worn thin. Beside him sat a small bowl that rarely held more than a few coins, sometimes nothing at all. Children mocked him. Men cursed him. Women pulled their wrappers tighter and hurried past as if poverty were contagious. Amara watched all of this quietly. She did not know why his presence unsettled her so deeply. Perhaps it was the way people's cruelty seemed louder around him. Or perhaps it was because in his stillness she saw a reflection of everything the world had decided was disposable. That first day she hesitated. She had little to spare. But when she reached her stall and broke her bread for lunch, she found her hands moving on their own. Half of it went into a small cloth. Without thinking too much, she walked back toward the gate. The beggar did not look up when she placed the bread into his bowl. He only nodded once slowly, as if acknowledging something deeper than food. "Thank you," he said softly. The words stayed with her all day. From that moment, Amara's path subtly changed. No matter how little she earned, she set aside something small for the man by the gate. A piece of bread, a handful of rice. Once even a mango she had planned to eat herself. People noticed. They always did, and in a place where everyone was already fighting to survive, her kindness began to look like rebellion. Unbeknownst to Amara, that quiet rebellion was about to set her on a path that would test every promise she had ever made to her mother, to herself, and to the fragile belief that goodness still mattered. By the second week, everyone in the market knew what Amara was doing. It began with murmurs, soft, curious whispers that followed her footsteps as she crossed the dusty ground toward the gate. Then the whispers grew teeth. People started watching her more closely, counting the coins in her hands, measuring the size of her basket as if searching for proof that her kindness was a lie. Every morning, the blind beggar sat in the same place, back straight, head slightly bowed, his wooden stick resting neatly beside him. The dark glasses never left his face, no matter how harsh the sun became. He spoke little. He asked for nothing. Most days his bowl remained empty long after the market filled with noise and movement. Children were the worst. They learned early what the adults practiced silently. One afternoon, as Amara arranged peppers on her stall, a sharp laugh cut through the air. She looked up just in time to see 3 boys circling the beggar. One kicked dust into his bowl. Another tossed a pebble that struck the ground inches from his foot. "Stand up, useless man," one of them shouted. "If you can't see, why don't you disappear?" The boys burst into laughter, encouraged by the indifference of nearby adults. No one intervened. No one scolded them. The blind man did not flinch. He only tightened his fingers around his stick as if grounding himself in silence. Something in Amara snapped. She left her stall without thinking, her heart pounding harder with each step. When she reached the boys, her voice cut through their laughter like a blade. "Enough," she said sharply. The boys froze, startled by the force in her tone. One of them rolled his eyes. "Why do you care?" "He's nothing." Amara stepped closer, positioning herself between them and the beggar. "You will leave him alone," she said. "Now." For a moment it seemed they might challenge her. Then one of them scoffed and spat on the ground. "Crazy girl," he muttered. "Soon you'll be begging beside him." They ran off, still laughing but quieter now. Amara turned toward the blind man, her chest rising and falling rapidly. His head was still lowered, his face unreadable behind the glasses. "Are you all right?" she asked. He nodded once. Slowly. Without another word, Amara reached into her basket and pulled out a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. She placed it gently into his bowl. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's better than nothing." This time his hand moved to the bread almost immediately. His fingers closed around it with careful precision. "Thank you," he said again. She returned to her stall with heat burning behind her eyes, not from the sun but from the stairs. The market had gone quiet in a different way. Women leaned toward one another, lips curling with judgment. Men shook their heads. Someone laughed. "Look at her," a voice whispered loudly enough to be heard. "She can't even feed herself." Another added, "Her mother is dying at home and she's feeding beggars." The words struck deeper than stones. Amara kept her gaze fixed on the vegetables before her, pretending she had not heard. But inside, something twisted painfully. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that hunger did not cancel humanity, that suffering did not give anyone the right to become cruel. Instead, she worked. And the next day she returned with another piece of bread, then another. It became a ritual, a quiet exchange that needed no witnesses. Amara would pass by the gate, place food into the bowl, and continue on her way. Sometimes the beggar spoke, sometimes he did not. But his presence began to feel familiar, grounding like a constant in a world that shifted without warning. The market's response, however, grew uglier. Charity worker one woman sneered as Amara passed. "Will your kindness pay hospital bills?" Another laughed openly. "If her mother dies, she'll understand life better." Amara learned to swallow each insult whole. Yet something strange began to happen. The more the market mocked her, the more the blind man seemed to notice her in ways that unsettled her. He never asked her name, never asked for more food. But sometimes when she passed, he would speak words that felt uncomfortably precise. "Pain teaches people many things," he said one morning without lifting his head. "Not all lessons are kind." Amara paused. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he replied. "Just an observation." Another day, when she hesitated before placing the bread into his bowl, he said quietly, "Even when your hands shake, you still give." She looked at him, then startled. "How did you know?" He smiled faintly. "I hear more than people think." At times, Amara wondered if he could somehow sense her presence before she arrived. The thought made her uneasy, but she brushed it aside. Poverty had taught her not to chase mysteries. Survival demanded focus. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the market, Auntie Sophia appeared. Her arrival was never subtle. She walked with purpose, chin lifted, eyes sharp as knives, scanning for weakness. When she spotted Amara, her mouth tightened. "There you are," she snapped, marching toward the stall. "Wasting time again." Amara stiffened. "I'm working, Auntie." Sophia's gaze followed Amara's line of sight to the gate, to the blind man. Her lips curled with disgust. "So it's true," she said. "You really are feeding him." "He's hungry," Amara replied quietly. Sophia laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Hungry, let him starve. Hunger is the only language this world understands." She grabbed Amara's arm fingers, digging into her skin. "You think kindness will save you? Look at your life." Amara bit her lip, holding back tears. "I can't ignore him." Sophia leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. "Your mother is dying," she hissed. "And you are throwing food at strangers." The words struck harder than any slap. That night, as Amara sat beside her mother's bed, she replayed them over and over. Mama Zola slept fitfully, her breath shallow. Amara held her hand and stared into the darkness, torn between guilt and conviction. Was she wrong? Was kindness a luxury she could no longer afford? The next morning, when she reached the market, her pouch felt lighter than usual. Her stomach clenched as she counted the coins. Barely enough for medicine, nothing extra. She stood at her stall, staring at the small loaf she had brought for herself. For a long moment she hesitated. Then she walked toward the gate. As she placed the bread into the bowl, she noticed something she had never seen before. The blind man's hand reached out, not searching, not uncertain, but straight to the bread. His fingers closed around it effortlessly, as if guided by sight rather than guesswork. Amara's heart skipped. She said nothing. She only watched him carefully as she walked away. For the first time since she met him, doubt crept into her certainty, and with it the quiet realization that this simple act of kindness, this daily defiance of cruelty, was about to pull her into something far larger than hunger or poverty. The market had always been loud, but now the noise felt different. It was no longer just the calls of traders or the clatter of baskets. It had become a chorus of judgment, and Amara could feel it pressing against her from every direction. Wherever she moved, eyes followed. Some watched with curiosity, others with open contempt. The whispers no longer bothered to hide themselves. They floated freely through the air, sharp and deliberate, meant to land exactly where they would hurt the most. "There she goes again," a woman muttered as Amara passed with her basket. "The girl who feeds beggars but can't save her own mother." Another laughed. "When her mother dies, maybe she'll finally wake up." The words struck like invisible blows. Amara kept her head lowered, her face carefully neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave people permission to be crueler. Silence, though painful, was armor. Yet inside her heart trembled. She wondered if kindness was supposed to feel this lonely. At her stall, business slowed. Customers hesitated, glancing toward the gate as if Amara's small act of generosity had somehow stained her goods. One woman picked up a tomato, inspected it, then dropped it back into the basket with a scowl. "People who waste food don't deserve business," she said loudly before walking away. Amara swallowed hard. Every lost sale mattered. Every coin counted. Still, when the sun reached its highest point and the market grew restless, her feet carried her once more toward the gate. The blind man sat exactly where he always did, unmoving, silent. The bowl beside him was almost empty. She placed a small portion of rice into it and turned to leave. "Today was heavy," he said quietly. Amara froze. She looked back at him, her brow furrowing. "How would you know?" He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something she could not hear. "People speak loudly when they think no one is listening." Something about his words unsettled her. But before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "So this is where all your food goes." Auntie Safia stood a few steps away, arms crossed, eyes burning with disapproval. She had followed Amara without announcing herself, and now she looked ready to strike. Amara's shoulders stiffened. "Auntie," Safia waved her off. "Don't auntie me," she snapped. "I see now why you come home empty-handed." She stepped closer to the blind man, looking down at him as if he were dirt beneath her feet. "You," she said, "are destroying this girl's life." The blind man did not respond. Safia turned back to Amara, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks. "You think feeding him makes you holy," she hissed. Holiness doesn't buy medicine. Amara winced but did not pull away. He's hungry, she said softly. Just like us. Sophia laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Then let him die hungry, she replied. That's what happens to people who have nothing. Several traders nearby pretended not to listen, but their eyes gleamed with interest. Public humiliation like blood drew a crowd. Sophia leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not her cruelty. Your mother is fading, Amara. Every day you waste food, you steal from her. The words pierced deeper than Sophia knew. That night, Amara barely slept. She lay beside her mother, listening to her labored breathing, the market's voices replaying in her mind. Doubt crept into places it had never reached before. Was she wrong to give? Was she being selfish by trying to remain kind when survival demanded hardness? Mama Zola stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open. Amara, she whispered. Amara leaned in immediately. I'm here, Mama. Her mother's fingers curled weakly around hers. You look troubled. Amara forced a smile. Just tired. Mama Zola studied her daughter's face as if reading lines written by pain. Do not let them make you ashamed of who you are, she murmured. The world is already cruel enough. Tears burned Amara's eyes. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. The next day, the market seemed determined to break her. Children mimicked her movements, pretending to drop food into imaginary bowls. Adults laughed openly now, no longer bothering to hide their disdain. Saint Amara, someone called mockingly. Will you bless us today? Another voice chimed in. Maybe the beggar will marry her. Two useless mouths together. The laughter was loud, relentless. Amara focused on her work hands, shaking slightly as she arranged her produce. Her pouch felt lighter than usual. She counted the coins twice, her chest tightening with fear. Even with today's sales, she would not have enough for medicine. Still, when she approached the gate, she carried food. She knelt this time, lowering herself to the blind man's level, shielding the act from some of the watching eyes. I don't know how long I can keep doing this, she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The blind man turned his face toward her. Though his eyes were hidden, it felt as though he were looking straight into her soul. Sometimes, he said slowly, the smallest light is tested by the darkest winds. Amara frowned. You speak like someone who has lost much. He paused before answering. I have. Their conversation ended there, interrupted by Sophia's return. This time, her aunt did not hide her rage. She marched straight to Amara, slapped a handful of coins onto the stall, and leaned close enough that only Amara could hear. I have found a solution, Sophia said coldly. Amara's heart sank. What kind of solution? A man, Sophia replied. Old, wealthy, respected. He will pay a bride price large enough to cover everything. Amara felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. No, she breathed. I won't. Sophia's smile vanished. You don't have a choice. Before Amara could respond, Sophia raised her hand and struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the market. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by silence thick with anticipation. Amara staggered but did not fall. She tasted blood. Stop embarrassing me, Sophia hissed. You will do as you're told. Amara's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Slowly, she turned her head toward the gate. The blind man sat motionless, his expression unreadable. For the first time since she had met him, Amara wondered if anyone truly saw her suffering, and if anyone ever would. That evening, the walk home felt longer than usual. Amara's cheek still burned where her aunt's hand had struck her, but the pain on her skin was nothing compared to the ache pressing against her chest. Each step stirred the same question again and again. How much more can one heart carry before it breaks? The house stood quietly at the edge of the compound, its walls cracked from years of neglect. When Amara pushed the door open, the familiar smell of herbs and old medicine greeted her. Inside, Mama Zola lay motionless, her breathing shallow, her face drawn tight by fever. Amara rushed to her side. "Mama," she whispered, kneeling. "I'm here!" Her mother's eyelids fluttered open slowly. It took a moment for recognition to settle in her tired eyes. When it did, a faint smile appeared, fragile as glass. "You're late," Mama Zola murmured. "The market was busy," Amara replied, gently wiping sweat from her mother's forehead. She did not mention the slap. She did not mention the whispers. She had learned to shield her mother from anything that might steal what little strength she had left. Mama Zola coughed weakly, turning her face away. Amara reached for the cup of water beside the bed and helped her drink one careful sip at a time. When the coughing stopped, her mother exhaled shakily. "Did you eat?" Mama Zola asked. Amara hesitated. "Yes," she lied softly. Her mother's eyes searched her face as if she knew the truth but chose not to challenge it. Slowly she reached out and took Amara's hand. "You've grown thinner," she said. Amara forced a small smile. "You worry too much." Mama Zola's grip tightened, surprising her with its strength. "Listen to me," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "This world will try to harden you, especially now." Amara swallowed. "I know." "No," her mother insisted. "You don't. Not yet." She shifted with difficulty, wincing as pain coursed through her frail body. Amara moved to support her, tears stinging her eyes. "Promise me something," Mama Zola whispered. Amara nodded. "Anything. Do not let suffering turn you into someone you don't recognize," her mother said. "Even when it costs you. Even when you are alone." Amara felt her throat tighten. She lowered her head, pressing her forehead against her mother's hand. "I promise," she whispered. That night, sleep came in fragments. Amara lay awake, listening to every change in her mother's breathing, terrified of the silence that might follow. At some point, exhaustion pulled her into a shallow rest. But she woke repeatedly, heart racing, convinced something was wrong. By dawn, fear had settled into her bones. Mama Zola's fever had worsened. Her skin burned beneath Amara's touch, her breaths coming faster, now strained and uneven. "We need the medicine," Amara whispered to herself. She reached for the small pouch she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. With shaking hands, she pulled it out and spilled the contents onto the mat. Coins rolled across the floor, dull and few. Amara counted them once, then again. Her chest tightened as reality set in. It wasn't enough, not even close. Enough. Not. She pressed her palms against the ground, fighting the wave of panic rising inside her. For a moment, the room felt too small, the air too thin. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. There had to be a way. She rushed to the market earlier than usual, her steps hurried, her thoughts racing. If she sold everything today, maybe she could borrow the rest. Maybe someone would take pity. Maybe the market was already alive with movement. Traders shouted prices, buyers bargained aggressively, the familiar chaos wrapping around her like a storm. Amara worked quickly, calling out softly, offering fair prices, smiling when she could. Time slipped through her fingers like sand. By midday, her basket was half empty, but her pouch still felt painfully light. She counted again. Still not enough. Her stomach twisted as she imagined returning home empty-handed. She imagined her mother's breathing growing weaker. She imagined regret so heavy it would crush her. As she turned toward the gate, the blind man was there as always. For the first time since she had met him, Amara hesitated. She reached into her basket and touched the small piece of bread she had set aside. Her fingers lingered there longer than usual. 1,000 thoughts clashed inside her mind. This could buy medicine. He will survive one day without it. My mother may not. Her hand trembled. Across the market, Auntie Sophia watched her closely, her eyes sharp with expectation. It was as if she were daring Amara to choose wrong. Slowly, Amara withdrew the bread. She walked toward the gate. The blind man turned his head slightly as she approached, though she had made no sound. "You are troubled," he said quietly. Amara stopped in front of him. For a moment she could not speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely a whisper. "My mother is very sick." "I know," he replied. The simplicity of his answer startled her. She stared at him, searching his hidden eyes. "How?" she asked. He did not answer. Amara looked down at the bread in her hands. Her fingers tightened around it. This time she did not place it in his bowl. "I can't today," she said, shame flooding her chest. "I'm sorry." There was a long pause. Then the blind man nodded slowly. "You owe me nothing." Relief and guilt collided inside her, leaving her dizzy. She turned away quickly, afraid that if she stayed any longer she would change her mind. That evening she returned home with the medicine. She administered it carefully, following the instructions she had memorized from the clinic. Mama Zola swallowed with difficulty, her breathing easing slightly as the fever began to subside. Amara sat beside her long after the sun disappeared, watching, waiting, praying. For a brief moment hope flickered. But hope was cruel that way. In the early hours of the morning, Mama Zola stirred restlessly. Her breaths grew uneven again, sharp and shallow. Amara woke instantly, panic gripping her heart. "Mama," she whispered urgently. Her mother opened her eyes one last time. She looked at Amara with a tenderness that broke something deep inside her. Slowly she raised her hand and touched her daughter's cheek. "You kept your promise," she murmured. Amara shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Don't talk like that." Mama Zola smiled faintly. "Live well," she whispered. Then her hand slipped from Amara's face. The room fell silent. Amara screamed. The sound tore from her chest, raw and broken, echoing off the walls that had witnessed too much suffering. She held her mother's body, rocking back and forth, her tears soaking into the thin mat beneath them. By morning, the house was filled with neighbors, not to comfort, but to observe. Death always attracted attention. Auntie Sophia arrived last. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold. She looked at Mama Zola's lifeless form without a trace of sorrow. "It's done then," she said flatly. Amara lifted her head slowly, her eyes hollow. "You took the money," she whispered. "You knew she needed it." Sophia shrugged. "Life is cruel, girl. Learn it." Something inside Amara shattered. The burial was small, quick, no songs, no speeches, just earth and silence. When it was over, Amara returned to the market, her body moving on instinct alone. She went straight to the gate. The blind man was gone. No stick, no bowl, no trace. Amara stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space, her heart heavier than it had ever been. For the first time, she truly felt alone. The days after the burial passed like a blur, each one heavier than the last. Amara moved through the world as if wrapped in thick cloth, her senses dulled, her heart hollowed out. The house felt different now, too quiet, too empty. Mama Zola's mat remained in the corner untouched. Amara could not bring herself to roll it away. It was the last physical proof that her mother had been real, that love had once filled that space. Auntie Sophia wasted no time. The morning after the burial, she announced it without ceremony. "This house is mine," she said, tossing a rusted key onto the floor. "You will sleep where I tell you until your bride price is paid." Amara did not argue. There was no strength left for defiance, not yet. She gathered her few belongings and moved to a small storage room at the back of the house. The walls were damp, the floor cold. It felt fitting, like the world had finally decided where she belonged. At the market, things were worse. People watched her differently now. Pity had replaced mockery, but it was no kinder. Some shook their heads when she passed. Others avoided her entirely, as if death were contagious. "That's the girl whose mother died," someone whispered. "She should have listened to her aunt," another replied. Kindness didn't save anyone. Amara heard it all. But what unsettled her most was the emptiness by the gate. Each morning her feet carried her there before she even realized it. She would stop, her breath catching eyes scanning the familiar spot. The ground was bare. No bowl, no stick, no silent presence anchoring her routine. The blind man was gone. No one knew where he had gone or when. Some said he had died. Others claimed he had been chased away during the night. A few whispered something stranger, that he had never been blind at all. Amara tried not to listen. Still questions gnawed at her. She remembered the way his hand had reached for the bread so precisely. The way he spoke as if he understood pain too well. The way he had known when her hands trembled. And the night her mother died, he had vanished. The coincidence felt too sharp to ignore. One afternoon, as Amara arranged what little produce she still sold, she overheard two women speaking nearby. "They say that beggar was a fraud," one said, lowering her voice. "A man pretending to be blind," the other scoffed. "If that's true, then shame on him, begging when he could work." Amara's fingers froze. "Did anyone see him leave?" the first woman asked. "No," came the reply. "He just disappeared." Amara's chest tightened. A strange certainty settled over her, quiet, heavy, undeniable. This isn't over. That evening, Auntie Sophia returned from the market with a satisfied smile. "Chief Damba will come tomorrow," she announced. "You will wear the wrapper I give you. You will smile. You will agree." Amara looked up slowly. "I won't sell myself." Sophia's smile vanished. "You have nothing else to sell." Amara stood, her fists clenched at her sides. "I would rather starve." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Starve, then. But you will do it under my roof." That night, Amara did not cry. Instead, she sat awake, staring into the darkness, her mother's last words echoing in her mind. "Do not let suffering turn you into someone you don't recognize." The next morning, Sophia threw a faded wrapper at her feet. "You will serve drinks at the festival," she said. "Let people see how useful you can be." Amara picked it up without a word. The village buzzed with preparation. Drums were tested, colorful fabrics appeared. Laughter filled the air as if sorrow had never existed. Amara moved among it all like a ghost, her mind distant, her heart guarded. As she worked, whispers followed her. "She's being sold to the chief. Her aunt is clever, turning death into profit." Amara kept her head down, but inside something had changed. Grief had stripped her of fear. By midday, the sun burned overhead. Amara paused near the gate once more, staring at the empty space where the blind man had once sat. "I don't know who you really are," she whispered to no one. "But if you were watching, then you saw everything." She turned away, unaware that her words were closer to the truth than she could imagine. The festival arrived faster than she expected. By the time the drums began, the village courtyard was alive with color and sound. Wealthy guests arrived in fine fabrics, gold glinting in the sunlight. Elders took their seats beneath the shade of large trees. The poor lined the edges, waiting for instructions. Amara stood among the servers, a tray of drinks balanced carefully in her hands. Every step felt like a reminder of how far she had fallen and how little she had left to lose. "Move faster," a woman snapped as Amara passed. She obeyed. As she turned toward the center of the courtyard, something made her stop. A hush rippled through the crowd. Amara followed the direction of everyone's gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. A man had entered the festival grounds. He walked with calm authority, his posture straight, his steps confident. He wore simple but fine traditional attire, clean and well-fitted. People shifted to make space for him, instinctively respectful. Amara's heart began to pound. There was something familiar in the way he moved, in the way his head turned alert and aware. Then he lifted his face. Her hands went numb. The tray slipped from her grasp. Cups shattered against the ground, liquid splashing across her feet. Gasps filled the air. Someone cursed, but Amara heard none of it. She was staring at the man who had once sat blind and dusty by the market gate. He was no longer blind, and he was walking straight toward her. The courtyard fell into a stunned silence. Broken cups lay scattered at Amara's feet, their contents seeping into the dust like something wasted and forgotten. Auntie Safia's voice rose sharply above the murmurs, cutting through the moment like a whip. "Stupid girl," she barked. "Look at what you've done." Amara did not move. Her eyes were locked on the man approaching her, slow, deliberate, unhurried. With every step, he took the memory of the blind beggar by the market gate unraveled further. There was no wooden stick now, no dark glasses, no bowed head. This man walked like someone accustomed to being seen, like someone accustomed to command. The villagers leaned forward, curiosity buzzing through the air. Some recognized him instantly. Others felt it before they understood it, the subtle shift that happens when power enters a space. Auntie Safia grabbed Amara's arm nails, digging into her skin. "Don't embarrass me further," she hissed. "Lower your head." Amara barely felt the pain. The man stopped a few steps away from her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. He looked at her, not with mockery, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Something steady. "Come," he said softly. The single word carried more authority than Safia's shouting ever had. Safia scoffed. "She's busy. Go find someone else." The man turned his gaze toward her. It was not loud. It was not threatening. But whatever passed between them drained the color from Safia's face. Her grip loosened. "I wasn't asking," he replied calmly. Amara felt her heart pounding against her ribs. Fear whispered in her ear, fear of punishment, of consequences, of hope. But beneath it all, something stronger rose. She stepped forward. The crowd inhaled sharply. Safia hissed her name, but Amara did not look back. She followed the man as he led her away from the noise toward the shade of a large tree at the edge of the courtyard. The drums resumed slowly behind them, uncertain, as if the celebration itself had lost its confidence. Under the tree, the air felt cooler. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Amara's thoughts raced, colliding with each other. Anger, confusion, relief, betrayal. She clenched her hands tightly, afraid that if she spoke too soon, her voice would shatter. "You lied," she said at last. The man nodded. "I did." The honesty disarmed her more than any excuse could have. She laughed bitterly. "You sat there and let them throw stones at you, let them spit near you, let them laugh, and all that time you could see." Yes, why her voice cracked. Why pretend to be blind? Why let people humiliate you? He studied her face carefully before answering. "Because I needed to know who people were when they thought no one important was watching." Amara shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "And I was part of your test." "No," he said firmly. "You were not the test." She looked up sharply. "I was testing the world." He continued quietly. "You were the answer." The words hit her harder than she expected. Amara turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "You don't get to say that," she whispered. "Not after everything." "I know," he replied, "and I am not here to excuse myself." She faced him again, her eyes blazing now. "Do you know what it cost me? Every piece of food I gave you was something I didn't have. People laughed at me. They called me stupid. My aunt used it as proof that I was useless." His jaw tightened. "My mother died." Amara continued, her voice trembling. "And the night she died, you disappeared." For the first time, something like pain crossed his face. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Silence stretched between them. Amara laughed again, hollow and tired. "Of course you didn't." He took a step closer, then stopped as if unsure whether he was allowed to cross that distance. My name is Kofi, he said, and I owe you the truth. She did not respond. I lost everything once Kofi went on. Not to poverty, but to betrayal. People I loved, family, friends, saw my wealth before they saw me. When I fell, they vanished. I needed to know if kindness still existed without reward. Amara's chest tightened. She remembered the way he had thanked her, the way he had spoken of pain like someone fluent in it. So you chose to sit at a gate and watch people fail, she said. I chose to sit there and wait, he corrected. To wait for someone who would give without calculating the return. Her hands trembled. And what happens now that you found me? Kofi met her gaze steadily. Now I make things right. Before she could ask what that meant, a voice called out from the center of the courtyard. Kofi, an elder, said, "We are waiting." Kofi straightened his posture, shifting subtly as if a mantle had settled back onto his shoulders. He looked at Amara once more. "Stay close," he said. "You deserve to hear what comes next." Then he turned and walked back toward the crowd. Amara stood frozen beneath the tree, her heart racing, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. Behind her, Auntie Safia watched from a distance, unease creeping into her expression for the first time. And as Kofi stepped into the center of the festival, raising his hand for silence, Amara felt it clearly. This story was no longer hers alone. Kikofi buok vau trung tam san le hoi kong kanain hats nho jam jong tu jong im lang. Tieng trong tatan hu the chin and hung hip jiu kong jang cho joy. Gyo thoi qua hang kay mang theo bui va mui jat nong. Nhung vi trong laon ngoi thang lung hon train hang ke go chin lai ao choang. Nhung ngoi gyao thoi titham. Nhung ngoi heo ninto. Amara jung oria jam jong tim jap don dap. Hai chan ko ron nen hung ko khong lui lai. Tunoi jo ko hin dai ro moi tu va kung bi moi an hin chiao tang vao. Ko figio tai. Chimot kuchi. San le hoi chim han vao yen lang. Tat ka ngoi jo biet toi kofi bat jiao gyong ong ro rang bin tin kong kan fai kao. Huat sit nhat ngoing hila min biet. Mot lan song shik sao lan han roi tat ngam. Ngoi jandai toi ngoi o kung cho ong tiep tuk. Ban thiu, kui jiao, mu loa, kung kogi je cho ngoi ngoi trusuku chiu. Mot vai ngoi kui mat chuong. Nung ngoi bat jiao kam tai batan, kong ngoi jan em jakofi noi an mat kwet kwa jam jong kong bosot motai. Song ngoi kwoi. Kong ngoi kwai jigya von hutoi kong tontai. Mot ngoi jan ong tre nuot kan. Mot fu nu keo kon trum jiao thap hon. Amara kamnhan juok tung loin hujang kachvao kong ki. Va kong ngoi kofi noi tiep gyong ong cham lai jan jung ra. Nung kai jiao kwe ngoat ve fia Amara. Ko hit sao vai tang len. Lan jiao tien trong hiung gai ko hong kui jiao. Ngoi jo kofi noi chitei ve fia ko jan kia se tukan kichin min kung joy. Jan bao ve toi ki jiao jo mang lai choko ai susin huk. Jan cho ji ma kong mong han lai. Kong ai kwoi, kong ai noi. Suim lang gio jai, nang nen hu mot banan. Amara kam thai ko hong min ko rat. Ko kong biet nen sao hotuk yan hai tu hao. Tat ka kam suk tron lan vao nao kien ko gan nu kong jung vong. Kofi kwei ve fia kach trong lao. Hom nai toi tro lai kong fai voi tu kach mot kian shin ong noi mala mot ngoi jok ban fuok voi tai san va an huong. Nung toi kong jen je koi koang. Mot vai tieng vo tai le lui vang len roi tat ngai kiong gio tai lan nua. Kwa kai da dong noi kong fai la thunam trong tui. Mala thunam trong kach chung ta joy su voi nhung ngoi kong de tra on. Nhung loi jon hu mot tam gong. Va kong ai trong jam jong thich hin an min jang thai. Auntie Safia jung kung ngoi mat tai mit. Bantai ba siet chat vat au jen mut kats jot ngon tai trang bech. Mat ba jiao kwan tim kiem su ung hon hung kong kon ai jung ve fia ba. Kofi bok shuang tu vitri trong tam tien tang ve fia Amara. Moi buok jikwa ong kien jam jong tak ratao than mot loi jim lang. Amara kam dai timin jap man jen mutstai uji. Kiong dung lai truok mat ko the gioik sung kwan duong nhu bien mat. Toi no kon hiu hon loi kam on kofi noi jun ho je chi min kon ge thai. Hom nay toi tralai shoko thu ho jan koleji, kun gang len joy mat uoten hung sang. Fam giakwa ko ong jua taira. Amaran hin bantai jorat lau. Trong kwan kachay ko tay laitat kan hung bui sang joy kat hung loi che giu kay tato chokan fong trong trai noi me ko janam. Ko tay kang goy janong muo kong choim lang nan tung mieng ban. Roi ko jat tay min vao tay ong. Kong fai nu mot ke juok ku roi. Ma nu mot kon goy ngang hang. Mot tieng to dai tap de lan kapsan le hui. Anti safia lau jiao lui lai va vao bonge fia sao vang goy fich chuong. Kong ai jo ba day. Le hoi ket thu ke drong mot bao hong ki kats hang ki no bat jiao. Kong kon tieng kwai lon. Kong kon supo truong. Moing goy ra ve voin hung swing hi nang triu. Jen sang hom sao ka lang chi noi ve mod jiu. Antatung la ke an sin. Ko gai jo ai mango juok chung ta jan lam gi the nai amara jikwa lang voi buok chan cham rani jau ngang kao. Kong fai vi kofi nam tai ko hom kwa ma vi lan jau tieng kong ai ko the cham vao fam gia kua ko nua. Nhung su yen bin hai kong keo dai. Ki amara troven ha ko thai nhung mon joi toi kwa min binem rangwai san kwan au chie kon ku kwa me vai vatung hovo vak. Auntie Safia Jung o kwa mat me o movi giandu. Maing hi mai hontao roi sao ba gao len. Jilain hunu huang chivi mot ngoi janong gyao noi ten mai amara ja tui suong gyong bin tin la thuong. Chao kong kon thuok vedi nua. Safia kwoi kai. Roi mai se kwai lai ki han bo mai. Janong nhu the luon bo roi nhung kon ben hum mai. Amara hong run. Tot hon lao mot min ko noi kon hon song doi main ha hong ko long han. Voi mot goi jon hu trentai ko kwei lung bok ji je lai tieng gao thet fia sao. Ko kong biet min se ji jiao. Nhung lan jiao tien moi buok shan jou mang theo tudo. Amara walked until the village sounds faded behind her. The path beyond the compound was narrow and uneven, winding between fields that had long stopped yielding much. The sun leaned low, painting the sky in shades of amber and dust. Each step carried her farther from the house that had never truly been home, farther from the voice that had tried to own her future. Her arms ached from holding the small bundle of belongings she had salvaged, but she did not stop. For the first time since her mother's death, the air in her lungs felt lighter. She did not know where she was going. She only knew where she would not return. As night approached, Amara reached the edge of the old community grounds, a place once used for meetings and celebrations, now mostly abandoned. She lowered herself onto a stone bench beneath a neem tree, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her body trembled not from fear but from release. The kind that comes after holding pain too long. She closed her eyes. In the quiet memories surfaced uninvited. Her mother's laughter soft and rare. The blind man's steady voice by the gate. The moment Kofi had taken her hand in front of the village. Each image collided with the next, forming something unfamiliar in her chest. Possibility. Footsteps broke the silence. Amara's eyes flew open as a young boy appeared, breathless. His face flushed from running. "Are you Amara?" he asked. She rose cautiously. "Yes." He bent forward, hands on his knees, catching his breath. "Sir Kofi sent me. He said I should find you and bring you to the hall." Amara's heart skipped. The hall. "The old one," the boy said, pointing back toward the village. "He's waiting?" She hesitated. For a moment, fear whispered that this too could be another test. Another promise that dissolved once hope took root. But then she remembered Kofi's words beneath the tree. "Stay close." Amara nodded. "Lead the way." The community hall stood at the edge of the village, its wide doors, open lanterns glowing warmly inside. When Amara stepped in, the scent of wood and paper filled the air. Tables had been arranged neatly. Documents lay stacked in careful piles. The place no longer felt abandoned, it felt prepared. Kofi stood near the center, speaking quietly with two elders. When he saw Amara, he dismissed them with a nod and turned toward her. "I heard you stood up to your aunt," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Amara shrugged. "I had nothing left to lose." Kofi studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "That is often where strength begins." He gestured toward the table. "Sit." She obeyed, her movements cautious but composed. Kofi took a seat across from her, folding his hands calmly. "I want to explain what today was really about," he said. Amara met his gaze. "I'm listening. For years, Kofi began, I've built wealth that could feed this village 10 times over. But I learned something the hard way: money attracts loyalty only until it disappears." Amara said nothing. "I lost family," he continued. "Friends, even a woman I thought loved me. When my fortune faltered, they vanished. I was left asking myself one question: if everything I had was gone, would anyone still see me?" He paused, eyes distant. "So I disappeared. I stripped myself of every sign of importance and sat where no one wanted to look." Amara's fingers tightened on her lap. "At the gate." "Yes." His gaze softened. "And then you came." Amara inhaled slowly. "I wasn't trying to be different, I know," Kofi replied. "That's why it mattered." He reached for one of the documents and slid it toward her. "I am starting a foundation." Amara looked down, confusion flickering across her face. "For what?" "For women," he said simply. "Women like you." Her breath caught. "Like me, women pushed to the edge," Kofi explained. "Orphans, widows, girls sold into marriages they didn't choose. Women who have strength but no protection." Amara's chest tightened. Images flooded her mind, faces she recognized, stories she had heard whispered in shame. "I don't want to give charity," Kofi continued. "Charity creates dependence. I want to build something that restores choice." He leaned forward. "And I want you to help me do it." The words hung between them, heavy and unreal. "Why me?" Amara asked quietly. Kofi did not hesitate. "Because you understand struggle, and because you said no when saying yes would have been easier." Amara shook her head slowly. "I don't want gold," she said. "I don't want to be rescued." A smile spread across Kofi's face. "Good. Neither do I." Time passed differently after that. Weeks turned into months. The foundation began with small steps, meetings under trees, borrowed rooms, donated materials. Amara threw herself into the work with a focus that surprised even herself. She listened to stories. She organized skills training. She spoke to girls who had never been asked what they wanted. The village watched from a distance. Some whispered with envy, others with suspicion, a few with growing respect. Amara walked the same roads where she had once lowered her eyes. Now she met gazes openly, not with arrogance, but with certainty. She had nothing to prove. One evening, as the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the courtyard of the new foundation building, Amara stood beside Kofi, watching a group of young women learn to sew. Laughter floated through the air, light and unburdened. "I came here searching for kindness," Kofi said quietly. "I found it." Amara turned toward him. "But I also found something else," he continued. "A partner." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, hand-woven, simple, imperfect. Not flashy, not expensive. "I don't offer you wealth," Kofi said softly. "I offer you a life built on truth and purpose. Will you walk it with me?" Amara felt tears rise, but they were different now. Steady, warm. "Yes," she said. "Not because I need saving, but because I choose you." The wedding took place beneath the oldest tree in the village. No grand displays, no excess. Just people gathered to witness something rare, two lives joined by respect. As they stood before the elders, Amara leaned close and whispered with a playful smile, "You pretended to be blind." Kofi laughed softly, "And you helped me see." Together they faced the future, not as savior and victim, not as rich and poor, but as equals, who had earned their place side by side. The weeks following the wedding were not the gentle ending the village expected. If anything, they were the beginning of a quieter, more difficult chapter, one that tested whether justice could survive beyond applause and whether dignity could endure once the crowd moved on. Amara woke each morning before sunrise just as she had always done. Habit, she realized, was stronger than circumstance. The difference now was not in her routine, but in her purpose. Where once she rose to sell vegetables for survival, she now rose to build something that might outlive her. The foundation grew slowly. There was no sudden flood of donations, no miracle that erased years of hardship overnight. Kofi insisted on it. "If we build this too fast," he said, "it will rest on money alone, and money by itself is fragile." So they started with what they had: a borrowed room, a few tables, a chalkboard. Amara organized meetings for women who had never been invited into decision-making spaces before. At first, many came only to listen, sitting stiffly at the edges, eyes lowered, afraid of being seen. Amara understood that fear. She never spoke down to them. She spoke with them. She listened more than she talked. She let silences stretch until courage found its way into the room. Slowly, stories emerged of girls pulled from school to be married, of widows stripped of land, of mothers choosing which child to feed when food ran out. Each story tightened something in Amara's chest. Each one reminded her why she had said yes. The village, meanwhile, watched with mixed emotions. Some praised Kofi openly, now calling him generous, wise, even noble. Others questioned his motives in private. "Men like him don't do things without reason," they whispered. "There must be something he wants." Amara heard the rumors but did not respond to them. She had learned that not every accusation deserved an answer. Auntie Sophia, however, did not stay silent. She appeared one afternoon at the edge of the foundation grounds, her posture stiff, her face set in a mask of wounded pride. Amara saw her before she was announced. Time seemed to slow as memories resurfaced, slaps, threats, cold laughter in the face of grief. Kofi noticed Amara's stillness. "Do you want me to speak to her?" he asked quietly. Amara shook her head. "No. Let me." She walked toward Sophia with measured steps, her heart steady. The woman who had once towered over her now looked smaller, diminished not by poverty but by the loss of control. "You think you've won," Sophia said bitterly. "Because you married wealth." Amara met her gaze. "I married honesty," Sophia scoffed. "This will pass. Men tire. Money shifts. You'll come back when it does." Amara's voice remained calm. "I didn't leave to prove anything to you. I left to live." For a moment, something flickered in Sophia's eyes. Regret, perhaps, or fear of being left behind by a world that was changing without her permission. But it passed quickly, replaced by anger. "You owe me," Sophia spat. Amara shook her head gently. "No, I don't." Sophia turned away without another word, her back rigid, her steps uneven. She did not return. That night, Amara sat beside Kofi under the same neem tree where her life had shifted so dramatically. The village lights flickered in the distance. Crickets filled the air. "Do you ever wish things had been easier?" Amara asked quietly. Kofi considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. "But then I think of what ease costs. It often asks us to look away." Amara nodded. She understood that now. The foundation faced its first real challenge soon after. A local official arrived unannounced one morning, flanked by two men in crisp shirts and stiff expressions. He surveyed the room with thinly veiled disdain. "You don't have the proper approvals," he said flatly. "This operation needs regulation." Amara felt tension ripple through the women gathered nearby. Old fears resurfaced of power used to silence, to shut doors without explanation. Kofi stepped forward, his voice measured. "We are in the process of registering." The official smiled without warmth. "Processes take time, and time has a price." The meaning was clear. Amara watched Kofi carefully, remembering the world he had come from, remembering how easily money could erase obstacles. Instead of reaching for his wallet, Kofi met the official's gaze. "We will do this correctly," he said. "Or not at all." The official's smile faded. He left with a warning and a promise to return. That evening, Amara found Kofi alone, staring at the paperwork spread across the table. "You could have paid him," she said softly. "Yes," Kofi replied. "And tomorrow another would come. Then another." She nodded. "This way is harder. It's the only way that lasts." Days stretched into weeks. The foundation endured inspections, delays, and skepticism. Amara learned how exhausting integrity could be. She learned that doing the right thing often meant standing still while others tried to push her back. But she also learned something else. The women began to change. They spoke more. They laughed more. They challenged one another gently. They learned skills not as charity but as tools. One by one, they found small ways to earn income, to say no, to choose differently. The village noticed. Fathers hesitated before pulling daughters from school. Men lowered their voices when women spoke, not out of fear but recognition. One evening, as Amara walked through the market, she passed the gate. The space where the blind man had once sat remained empty. She paused there, feeling the weight of memory settle around her. A young girl stood nearby, clutching a small basket, eyes wary. She reminded Amara painfully of herself. Without thinking, Amara knelt and adjusted the girl's load. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said gently. The girl looked at her with wide eyes. "They say you fed a beggar," she whispered. Amara smiled. "I fed a man." That night, as Amara lay beside Kofi, sleep slow to come, she thought of her mother. She imagined telling her everything that had happened, not as a story of rescue, but of becoming. "I kept my promise," she whispered into the darkness. Beside her, Kofi stirred slightly, his hand finding hers. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more resistance, more moments that demanded courage without guarantee. But for the first time in her life, Amara did not fear the unknown. She had learned that real wealth was not found in protection from hardship, but in the strength to face it without losing oneself. Change rarely arrives quietly. As the foundation continued its work, the village began to shift in ways that were subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. What had started as small gatherings under borrowed roofs slowly grew into something that unsettled old balances. Women who once spoke only in whispers now asked questions aloud. Girls who had learned to lower their eyes began to look forward when they walked. And not everyone was pleased. The men who benefited from silence felt it first. A few elders grumbled that traditions were being challenged. Some husbands complained that their wives had grown stubborn. A local trader accused the foundation of filling women's heads with nonsense. Amara heard all of it. She learned that justice once awakened rarely walks alone, it brings discomfort with it. One afternoon, as Amara was leading a discussion on basic bookkeeping, raised voices drifted in from outside. The room grew tense. Several women exchanged worried looks. Amara excused herself and stepped out into the heat. Two men stood near the entrance, arms crossed, expressions hard. One of them was Musa, a respected farmer whose word carried weight in the community. You are causing trouble, Musa said without greeting. Amara met his gaze calmly. We are teaching skills, Musa shook his head. You are teaching disobedience. My daughter now questions the marriage I arranged. This was never the way. Amara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old fear trying to resurface. She breathed through it. Was the old way kind to her? She asked quietly. Musa's jaw clenched. Kindness doesn't keep families fed. Amara nodded. Neither does silence. The second man scoffed. You think because you married wealth you can rewrite our lives? Amara straightened. I think because I lived poverty I can see what it does. The men left with sharp warnings and promises to speak to the elders. As they walked away, Amara felt the weight of consequence settle onto her shoulders. That night she shared the encounter with Kofi. They will push back harder now, he said thoughtfully. I know, Amara replied. They always do when power shifts. Kofi studied her closely. We can slow down, she shook her head. If we slow down, fear wins. The next weeks confirmed her fears. Funding offers appeared generous, sudden, and suspicious. Each came with conditions limit which women could attend, avoid sensitive topics, include certain names on the board. Kofi rejected them all. Money that demands silence is just another cage, he said. But rejection had its cost. Supplies grew scarce. A promised training space was withdrawn at the last minute. A local radio program that had agreed to feature the foundation canceled without explanation. Amara felt the pressure building from every side. One evening, exhausted, she sat alone in the hall long after everyone had left. The lantern flickered weakly. Papers lay scattered across the table, plans, lists, unfinished ideas. For the first time in months, doubt crept in. What if they're right? A voice whispered. What if this is too much? She closed her eyes, seeing her mother's face in her mind. Do not let suffering turn you into someone you don't recognize. Amara exhaled slowly. The next morning she made a decision. Instead of waiting for permission, she went to the women. She gathered them under the neem tree and spoke plainly. Not as a leader above them, but as one among them. They will try to stop us, she said. Not because we are wrong, but because change frightens those who benefit from things staying the same. A murmur rippled through the group. I won't force anyone to stay, Amara continued. This work is not easy. It may cost you comfort, it may cost you approval. She paused, meeting their eyes one by one. But if you stay, we stay together. Silence followed. Then a woman stepped forward, a widow who had once been afraid to speak at all. I stay, she said simply. Another followed, then another. Soon the space filled with voices, quiet but resolute. We stay. Word spread faster than Amara expected. Within days, women from neighboring villages began to arrive, walking long distances, bringing stories heavier than the baskets on their heads. They came not for promises, but for something rarer, the chance to choose. The elders could no longer ignore it. A council meeting was called. Amara and Kofi were summoned to present themselves. The hall was full when they arrived. Elders sat in a semicircle, faces stern, hands folded. The air was thick with expectation. You are disturbing the order, one elder began. Our customs exist for a reason. Amara stepped forward before Kofi could speak. Our customs were meant to protect, she said respectfully. Not to break. Another elder leaned forward. Who are you to decide this? Amara did not flinch. I am someone who lived the consequences. She told them her story, not dramatically, not with accusation, but with truth. She spoke of hunger, of being sold, of losing her mother while others watched. She spoke of the blind man at the gate and what kindness had cost her. When she finished, the hall was silent. One elder cleared his throat. And what do you want? Amara answered without hesitation. Choice. For women to say yes or no. For dignity to be recognized as wealth. The council dismissed them without a verdict. But something had shifted. That evening, as Amara and Kofi walked home beneath a sky heavy with stars, he squeezed her hand gently. "You were brave today," he said. Amara smiled faintly. "I was honest." Weeks later, the decision came. The foundation would be allowed to operate under observation, under scrutiny, but legally. It was not a victory shouted from rooftops. It was quieter, harder earned, and more real. The pushback did not disappear overnight, but neither did the women. As Amara stood one morning watching a new group begin their first lesson, she felt something settle inside her, a calm certainty. Change was no longer an idea. It was a movement, and like all movements born from truth, it would outlive the resistance against it. Success, Amara learned, had a memory. It remembered where she came from, and it never failed to invite the past to test whether she truly belonged in the future she was building. The foundation had been operating legally for nearly 3 months when the first real tremor came, not from the elders, not from officials, but from someone Amara had not expected to see again. Her aunt, Auntie Sophia, arrived one afternoon without warning, standing at the edge of the foundation compound as if unsure whether she was allowed to step inside. Time had not been kind to her. The sharp confidence she once wore so easily had dulled. Her wrapper hung looser on her frame. The authority in her posture had softened into something closer to desperation. Amara noticed her immediately. For a moment the world narrowed. The sounds of women learning, laughing, practicing new skills faded into a distant hum. Memories surged forward, slaps, threats, cold eyes watching her mother die. Kofi sensed the change beside her. "Do you want me to ask her to leave?" he murmured. Amara shook her head slowly. "No, I need to face this." She walked toward Sophia, her steps measured, her expression calm. "You have built something impressive," Sophia said, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "People speak your name everywhere now." Amara said nothing. Sophia cleared her throat. "I have come to apologize." The word hung awkwardly between them. Women nearby slowed their movements, pretending not to listen while missing nothing. "I did what I thought was best," Sophia continued. "Life taught me that softness gets you crushed." Amara studied her aunt's face. She saw fear there, and regret, but also something else, calculation. "You sold me," Amara said quietly, "when my mother was dying." Sophia flinched. "I was trying to save us. You were trying to save yourself." Silence fell. Sophia exhaled sharply. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "People won't speak to me. They blame me for everything." Amara felt a familiar ache rise in her chest, but this time she did not let it rule her. "You want forgiveness," Amara said. "But forgiveness is not access." Sophia's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means I release myself from hatred," Amara replied evenly. "But I do not give you power over my life again." Sophia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She nodded stiffly and turned away, her shoulders sagging. As she walked off, Amara felt something unexpected, not triumph, not satisfaction, but peace. That night, Amara sat alone long after the others had gone. She stared at the empty chairs, thinking of how easily cycles repeated when left unbroken. Kofi joined her quietly. "You did well." "It didn't feel like victory," she admitted. "It wasn't." He said gently, "It was growth." The next challenge came from a different direction. A regional organization announced a major funding initiative aimed at empowering rural women. Their representatives arrived with polished smiles and cameras in hand, eager to document the foundation's work. At first, Amara felt cautious optimism. The funding could expand training programs, reach more villages, change more lives. Then the conditions surfaced. They wanted branding everywhere. They wanted Amara to soften her language. They wanted success stories, curated poverty made palatable, struggle edited for comfort. "We need inspiration," one representative explained smoothly, "not confrontation." Amara listened carefully. Then she shook her head. "Our women are not decorations," she said. "Their stories are not marketing tools." The representatives exchanged glances. "You're being difficult," one said. "I'm being honest," Amara replied. They left politely and withdrew the offer the following week. The loss stung. That evening, Amara felt the weight of responsibility press down harder than ever. She sat with Kofi beneath the neem tree, watching the lanterns flicker. "What if integrity costs us everything?" she asked quietly. Kofi took a long breath. "Then at least we will know what everything is worth." Not long after the consequences arrived, a rumor spread that the foundation was turning women against their families. Attendance dipped. Some husbands forbade their wives from returning. A few women stopped coming not because they wanted to, but because resistance at home had grown violent. Amara listened to each story with a tightening heart. One woman arrived with a bruise hidden beneath her scarf. Another came shaking, whispering that her brother had threatened to disown her. That night, Amara could not sleep. She paced the small room, anger and helplessness battling inside her. Change was no longer theoretical. It was dangerous. By morning, she had made another decision. She called a meeting not just for women, but for families. The announcement shocked the village. Men arrived reluctantly, some with folded arms, others with open hostility. Elders watched from a distance, curious. Amara stood at the center, her voice steady. "I am not here to destroy families," she began. "I am here to stop women from being destroyed by them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "When women are educated, families grow stronger," she continued. "When women have choice, households become safer. Fear is not tradition. Violence is not culture." A man shouted from the back, "And who taught you this?" Amara met his gaze. "Life." She told them about her mother, about being sold, about the blind man at the gate and what kindness had revealed. She spoke without bitterness, without accusation, only truth. When she finished, silence spread like still water. Not everyone was convinced. Some left shaking their heads, but others stayed listening, questioning, thinking. It was enough. Weeks passed. Attendance slowly returned. Some women came secretly. Others arrived with husbands who sat quietly at the back, watching their wives learn to read numbers, to speak confidently, to laugh without fear. Change was uneven, painful, real. One evening, as Amara walked past the market gate, she stopped again. The spot was still empty. She closed her eyes, remembering the quiet man who had started it all, not with speeches, not with money, but with silence that invited truth. Behind her, a young man approached hesitantly. "My sister wants to come," he said awkwardly. "I don't understand everything you teach, but she's different now." "Stronger," Amara smiled gently. "Stronger women don't weaken families, they strengthen them." He nodded slowly. That night, Amara lay beside Kofi, exhaustion heavy but fulfilling. "We're changing more than laws," she whispered. "We're changing minds." Kofi squeezed her hand. "That's the hardest work there is." Amara stared into the darkness, thinking of all the resistance yet to come, all the courage it would demand. She was no longer afraid. She had learned that justice was not a moment, it was a practice, and she was ready to keep practicing. Just when the village began to breathe differently, something happened that threatened to undo everything Amara and Kofi had built. It started quietly. A young girl named Naya, one of the first to join the foundation, stopped coming. At first, Amara thought it was fear again, that perhaps Naya's family had forced her to stay home. It had happened before, but after 3 days, unease settled in. Naya never misses, one of the women said, even when it rains. Amara's heart tightened. By the 5th day, rumors began. They say her uncle took her away. No, I heard she was married off. Someone said she ran away. None of it felt right. Amara could not sit still any longer. She gathered 2 women and went to Naya's home. The compound was quiet, too quiet. The door was closed. No sound came from inside. Amara knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door creaked open. A man stood there, Naya's uncle. His expression was cold-guarded. "She's not here," he said before Amara could speak. Amara stepped forward slightly. "Where is she?" "That is not your concern. She is part of our program," the man scoffed. "She is part of my family." Amara held his gaze. "And her safety matters." The uncle's eyes narrowed. "You have filled her head with ideas. Now she refuses a good marriage." "You call that safety?" Amara felt anger rise, but she kept her voice steady. "Choice is not rebellion." The man slammed the door. Amara stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding. Something was wrong. That night she told Kofi everything. "We need to find her," she said. Kofi nodded immediately. "We will." The search began at dawn. Word spread quickly. Some helped, others watched. A few warned them to leave it alone. By afternoon, a boy came running. "I saw her," he said breathlessly, "near the old road." She was crying. Amara didn't wait. She ran. The path was rough, cutting through tall grass and uneven ground. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow. When she reached the bend near the abandoned huts, she saw her. Naya sat on the ground, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes swollen from crying. "Naya," Amara called. The girl looked up, relief flooding her face. "You came." Amara dropped beside her. "What happened?" "They tried to force me," Naya whispered. "They said the man had already paid." Amara's chest tightened. "Did they hurt you?" Naya shook her head, trembling. "I ran." Amara pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then footsteps approached. Naya's uncle appeared, followed by 2 men. His face darkened when he saw Amara. "I told you to stay away," he said. Amara stood slowly, placing herself between him and the girl. "She is not going back," she said firmly. The uncle laughed harshly. "You think you can take her? You have no authority here." Amara's heart pounded, but she did not step back. "I have something you don't," she said. "What is that, witness?" The men hesitated. By then, others had begun to gather, women from the foundation villagers, drawn by the tension. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The uncle's confidence faltered slightly. "This is a family matter," he insisted. Amara shook her head. It stopped being private when it became harmful. Kofi arrived moments later, his presence shifting the air. He stepped beside Amara, calm but unmistakably firm. "No one is taking her against her will," he said. The uncle's jaw tightened. "You are outsiders." Kofi met his gaze. "No, we are part of this community, and this community is watching." Silence fell. The uncle looked around, seeing faces he recognized, neighbors, elders, even a few men who had once supported him. But now their expressions were uncertain. Change had already begun. He just hadn't noticed. "You are turning people against their families," he muttered. Amara stepped forward. "No, we are asking families to protect their own." For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, one of the elders spoke from the edge of the crowd. "The girl should not be forced," he said. Another voice followed, then another. The uncle's resistance cracked. With a final glare, he turned away. "Do what you want," he snapped, "but don't come crying when she brings shame." He left, the others following. Naya collapsed into tears. Amara knelt beside her again. "You're safe," she said softly. But as she said the words, she knew something had shifted. This was no longer about quiet change. This was confrontation. That evening, the foundation was filled with tension. Women spoke in hushed voices. Some were afraid, others were angry. All of them were watching Amara. "What if they come for us next?" one asked. "What if our families turn against us?" another added. Amara stood before them, her heart heavy but steady. "I won't lie to you," she said. "This path is not safe." The room fell silent, but neither is the one we left behind. She looked at each of them one by one. "Today we protected one girl. Tomorrow it may be another. This is what change looks like. Not easy, not quiet, but necessary." Kofi stepped forward beside her. "And you are not alone," he added. The women exchanged glances. Fear was still there. But so was something stronger. Resolve. Over the next days, the story spread beyond the village. Some called Amara brave, others called her dangerous. But no one ignored her anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Amara stood again by the market gate, the place where it had all begun. She closed her eyes briefly. "I understand now," she whispered. "Not just kindness, but courage." When she opened her eyes, she felt it clearly. The fight ahead would be harder than anything behind her. But she was no longer the girl who whispered apologies for doing what was right. She was the woman who stood in front of storms and did not move. The village had never felt so divided. In the days following Naya's rescue, tension hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. Conversations stopped when Amara passed. Doors closed more quickly. Eyes lingered longer, not with curiosity this time, but with judgment, fear, and in some cases quiet anger. What had once been whispers had now become positions. You were either for change or against it, and Amara stood at the center of that line. It began at dawn one morning. A loud knock shook the doors of the foundation building. Before anyone could respond, the doors swung open and a group of men stepped inside. At their front stood the same local official who had once tried to shut them down. His expression was no longer polite. "You have gone too far," he said coldly. The room fell silent. Women froze where they stood. Some instinctively stepped back. Others moved closer to Amara as if drawn by an invisible force. Amara walked forward slowly, her posture straight, her voice calm. "What is this about?" The official held up a document. "You are accused of interfering in family matters, disrupting community order, and encouraging defiance against lawful guardians." A murmur spread through the room. Amara felt her pulse quicken, but she did not let it show. "We are protecting women," she said. "You are provoking conflict," he countered. Kofi stepped beside her. "If protection creates conflict, then the problem is not protection." The official's eyes narrowed. "Careful. Your wealth does not place you above the law." Kofi met his gaze steadily. "And your position does not place you above justice." The tension thickened. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather. Word traveled fast in a place like this. Villagers pressed closer, drawn by the promise of confrontation. The official gestured sharply. "This facility is to be shut down pending investigation." Gasps echoed through the room. One woman began to cry softly. Another shook her head in disbelief. Amara felt the weight of every eye on her. Every expectation, every fear. This was the moment where everything could collapse. She stepped forward again. "No," she said. The single word landed like a stone in still water. The official blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," Amara repeated louder this time. "You will not shut this place down." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. The official laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "And who will stop me?" Amara turned slightly, looking past him toward the people gathering outside. Then she raised her voice. "Everyone who has ever been told they don't have a choice." Silence, then movement. Slow at first. A woman stepped forward from the back of the room, the widow who had first said, "I stay." She moved to stand beside Amara, then another, then another. Soon a line of women formed, not perfectly straight, not perfectly confident, but unbroken. Outside, more villagers began to step closer. Some men, some elders, some simply watching. The official's expression shifted. "This is intimidation," he snapped. Amara shook her head. "This is community." At that moment, a voice rose from the crowd. "She's right." Heads turned. It was Musa, the farmer, who had once confronted Amara. He stepped forward, his posture firm. "My daughter is in that room," he said. "She reads now. She helps me keep accounts. She speaks without fear." He looked at the official. "You call that disruption, I call it growth." Another man spoke, then another. Not all agreed, but enough did. The balance had changed. The official lowered his document slowly, his confidence cracking under the weight of collective presence. "This is not over," he said tightly. Amara met his gaze. It never was. He turned sharply and walked out, his men following. The crowd did not cheer. They simply stood. And in that standing, something powerful settled. Not victory, but recognition. Inside the foundation, the women began to breathe again. Some cried, some laughed, some simply sat down, overwhelmed. Amara remained where she stood, her legs trembling now that the moment had passed. Kofi placed a hand on her shoulder. "You held the line." Amara exhaled slowly. "We held it." That evening the village felt different. Not peaceful, but awake. People spoke openly now. Debates replaced whispers, questions replaced assumptions. Change had moved from the shadows into the light, and with that came a new kind of pressure. Responsibility. Later that night, Amara returned once more to the market gate, the place where everything had begun, the place where she had first chosen kindness over fear. She stood there in the quiet, the memory of the blind man vivid in her mind. "I didn't know it would lead here," she whispered. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Kofi." "You never do," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "I thought I was just helping someone survive." "You were," he replied. "You just didn't realize how many." Amara looked out at the empty space where he had once sat. For a moment she imagined him there again, silent, observing, waiting. Then she shook her head slightly. She didn't need that version of him anymore. She understood now. Kindness was not weakness. It was a seed, and when planted in the right heart, it could grow into something that even power could not control. As the night deepened, Amara turned away from the gate. The final chapter of her story was not about being chosen. It was about choosing again and again who she would be, no matter the cost. And tomorrow the work would continue. The morning after the confrontation did not bring silence. It brought clarity. The foundation doors opened as they always did, but something had changed in the way people approached them. No longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. Women walked in with purpose. Some carried notebooks, others carried stories. A few carried wounds that had not yet healed, but they came anyway. Amara stood at the entrance, watching them arrive. Each face told her the same thing. "We are still here." Inside, the space filled quickly. The air buzzed not with fear, but with something steadier. Resolve. Kofi moved quietly through the room, speaking to small groups, checking materials, offering guidance without taking control. That was his way. He had learned that leadership was not about standing in front, but about making sure others could. Amara stepped forward. "We continue," she said simply. "No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just truth." The women nodded, and they began. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The foundation grew not in size alone, but in depth. Programs expanded, skills diversified. Women who had once been students became teachers. Those who had found their voices began to help others find theirs. The village adapted, slowly, not perfectly but undeniably. Fathers began asking daughters what they wanted, not always accepting the answer but asking nonetheless. Husbands listened more, even if reluctantly. Boys grew up watching something different than what their fathers had known. The elders, once resistant, became observers, and then gradually participants in conversations they could no longer ignore. Change had not destroyed the community. It had reshaped it. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, Amara stood watching a group of young girls reading aloud. Their voices stumbled over words, then found rhythm, then confidence. She smiled. Kofi joined her, his hands resting loosely behind his back. "You've built something that will outlive us," he said. Amara shook her head gently. "We built it." Kofi tilted his head slightly. "You started it." She laughed softly. "No, it started at a gate." They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking of the same memory. A man sitting alone, a girl with very little to give, and a choice. Later that evening, the village gathered beneath the oldest tree, the same tree where Amara and Kofi had been married. This time, there were no ceremonies planned, no announcements made. People simply came. Word had spread that something was happening, and they wanted to witness it. Amara stood before them, not elevated, not separate, just present. "I didn't come here to change everything," she began. "I came here to survive." The crowd listened. "But survival is not enough," she continued. "Not when we have the power to help each other live better." She looked around, meeting eyes she once would have avoided. "I was called foolish for being kind," she said. "I was told kindness would leave me with nothing." A few heads lowered, but kindness gave me everything, she said quietly. "Not money, not comfort, but purpose." The silence deepened. "I stand here today not because someone saved me," Amara went on, "but because I chose not to let this world change who I am." Kofi stepped forward beside her, his presence steady. "And I stand here," he added, "because she reminded me what wealth truly means." He looked out at the crowd. "Not what we hold," he said, "but what we give." There were no loud reactions, no applause, just understanding. The kind that settles slowly, deeply. That night, as the gathering dispersed, Amara walked once more to the market gate, the place where it had all begun. The ground was quiet, untouched by the noise of the day. The space where the blind man had once sat remained empty, but it no longer felt hollow. It felt complete. Amara stood there for a long time, breathing in the stillness. "I didn't know who you were," she whispered. A soft breeze moved through the air, brushing against her skin. "But I know what you showed me." She closed her eyes, then opened them again, and turned away. Not because she was leaving something behind, but because she had carried it forward. As she walked back toward the life she had built, she felt it clearly. Kindness had not made her weak. It had made her unstoppable. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between struggle and strength, between loss and purpose, her mother's voice still echoed. "You kept your promise." Amara smiled. Yes, she had. In life, the world will often teach us that survival comes before compassion, that we must harden our hearts to protect ourselves. But this story reminds us of a deeper truth. Kindness is not a weakness reserved for the fortunate. It is a strength that defines who we are when everything else is stripped away. Amara had every reason to turn cold. She lost her mother, her home, and her dignity in the eyes of others. Yet she chose to give when she had nothing. And that choice did not just change her life, it transformed an entire community. Real wealth is not measured by money, but by the courage to do what is right when it costs you something. Sometimes the smallest act, a piece of bread, a moment of compassion, can echo further than we ever imagine. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us why kindness still matters.